Okay guys, so today we're going to talk about distributive property. So this page of notes you have right now is going to last us for 2 different lessons. This first video is going to stop here, and we're only going to do this first part of the notes that talks about distributing. When we finish that, we'll come back together and we'll talk about combining like terms and then how to write your final answer. When you have the word distribute, or you tell somebody you are using the distributive property, what that means is you need to take the term that is stuck to the outside of the parentheses and you need to use multiplication to distribute it to everything that's on the inside of the parentheses. Every term inside will be multiplied by that term from the outside. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this expression here, -2 parentheses x minus 3. The number you're distributing is the number that is on the outside of the parentheses. So the number to be distributed is -2. When you distribute that number, you're going to multiply to x and to this term here. Now, because this term has a minus sign in front of it, then that makes the 3 a negative value. So what we have is we have -2 times this x really has a 1 in front. So -2 times 1 is -2. Because it had an x, we're going to keep the x. -2 times -3 is a positive 6. The next one, we look for the parentheses. We look for the number that is touching the parentheses. The number touching the parentheses in this next expression is the 5. Now, there's a whole lot going on after this parentheses, but this distributive property only affects what's within the parentheses. So your 5 is going to distribute or multiply to the x and to this 4. But remember, because of this minus sign, it's not just a 4, it's a -4. So the number we're distributing is 5. 5 times x, remember this is a 1x. 5 times 1x is 5x. And 5 times the -4 is a -20. So that's how you write that. So if you get a negative answer, you're going to write it as a minus that value. Now, this plus 2x minus 3 isn't affected by this 5 on the outside because it is not within the parentheses. So we just copy that down. Plus 2x minus 3 stays how it is. The next one, we have a 3 in front. And so a lot of people want to say that that's what you distribute. But that 3 is not directly touching the parentheses. So it does not distribute. The 3 is going to stay where it is because it has nothing to do with the distributive property. The 2 is the number touching the outside of the parentheses, so that's what gets distributed. So we're distributing the 2. When we distribute the 2, we don't distribute the 2 to the 3 because it's not in the parentheses. We're going to distribute 2 to the x and 2 to the -5. This x is really a 1x, and 2 times 1 is 2. Positive 2, so we put a plus sign. Keep the x. 2 times this minus sign, remember, makes it a -5. 2 times -5 is -10, so we write it as minus 10. This next one, the 2, again, does not distribute because it is not touching the parentheses, so we just carry it over. The problem we have here is we have this plus parentheses. So really, there's nothing touching the outside of the parentheses, so we have to understand and write it in. There's a secret 1 that's stuck to the front of the parentheses there. So that 1 is the value we're going to distribute to the pieces inside the parentheses. We have 1 times a -x, which is really a -1x, and 1 times 5. 1 times -1x is -1x, and 1 times 5 is a positive 5. All right? That's probably one of the most confusing questions because people want to do something with the 2. The 2 just carries over, and 1 is what you distribute, okay? The next one looks kind of funny too because the number that's stuck to our parentheses is a fraction. That's okay. Fractions are just normal numbers that are very small, so they look different. But we can do the same operation with a fraction that we can do with the whole numbers. So in this case, the 2/3 is going to distribute to the pieces inside. So this is the number we're distributing, and it's going to multiply to the x and to the 1. Remember, in front of this x, there's really a 1. 2/3 times 1 is really the same as saying 2 times 1 divided by 3. That's still 2/3. We'll keep the x. 2/3 times 1 again is another positive 2/3. The minus 5. Some people want to distribute to the minus 5, but we don't because the minus 5 is outside the parentheses, so it just stays. All right? The next question is very similar to this one we did a couple of times ago. A lot of people want to distribute the 2, but the 2 isn't touching the parentheses, so it just stays how it is. This minus sign that's stuck to the parentheses, that's what gets distributed. And remember, if there's no value, you can input a 1. So it's really a -1 times a positive 1x. -1 times positive 1 is a -1, keep the x. -1 times -9 is a positive 9. Remember, a negative times a negative is a positive. So the value that we distributed is a -1. All right? These next ones look like a lot because there's 2 sets of parentheses, but it's really not a big deal. What you're going to do is you're going to highlight the piece touching the outside of each parentheses, and those are the pieces that get distributed. So in this one, this -2 will distribute, and here we have a plus sign but no value, so we're going to put in a 1. So we're distributing 2 things. We're going to distribute the -2 to the x and the 1. We're going to distribute the positive 1 to the 5x and the -4. So we're distributing a -2 to the first set of parentheses. We're distributing a positive 1 to the second set of parentheses. The 3 is not involved with our parentheses at all, so it just carries on over. -2 times 1x is -2x. -2 times 1 is -2. This positive 1 times 5x is a positive 5x, and the positive 1 times -4 is a -4. All right? The next one is weird because it's not a number on the outside, it's a letter. The thing touching this first parentheses is a -y. Well, there's no number, so we're going to say anywhere there's no number and we want it in front of a value or a letter, we can put a 1. So really this is -1y. The other thing that's touching a parentheses is this -2 or -2. The +7 isn't touching the parentheses, so it's just going to hang out at the end of our answer. We're going to distribute the -1y and the -2. Now, when you distribute a number and a letter, you're going to multiply the numbers and keep all of your letters. So -1 times 1, that's in front of x, -1 times 1 is -1. Y times x is just y times x. You just write them all down. -1 times this piece here, x squared. Remember, there's still a secret 1 in front, and because of this minus sign, it's a negative. So negative times negative, positive. 1 times 1, 1. Y times x squared, yx squared. Okay? Now the next set of parentheses, we're going to distribute the -2. Notice when you use the distributive property, all of the pieces in the first column had parentheses, but when I rewrite them after using the property, there is no more parentheses. That's why we use the distributive property, and that's what makes it so cool, is because it is our way of getting rid of all of the parentheses in our problem. So we have to now get rid of the second set of parentheses, so -2 times 5, -10. -2 times this minus x is really a -1x. So -2 times -1 is a positive 2. Keep the x. And then that +7 is still just hanging out on the end. All right? The next one, again, has 2 sets of parentheses, so there's 2 things we need to multiply by. The piece that is stuck in, or the term that's in front of the first set of parentheses is -3x. And in front of the second parentheses is not the +2, It's just the minus sign. Remember, if there's just a minus sign and then parentheses, it's really a -1 that's secretly stuck there. Okay? So we're going to distribute the -3x, and we're going to distribute the -1. What do I do with this +2? Again, it's not directly touching a set of parentheses, so it's just going to hang out and be written into our problem as we go. So here I have 3x times x. Remember, this x is a 1x. -3 times 1, -3. Now, x times x is kind of funny. When we have two letters that are the same multiplied together, we're going to call that x squared. Okay? And that might be new to some of you. Some of you might remember that. Then we have -3x times -4. Remember that -4 makes it a negative value. A negative times a negative is positive. 3 times 4, 12. +2 hangs out. -1 times 5, -5. -1 times -1x. -1 times -1 is a +1. Keep the x. Okay? All right, now the next one looks weird because it's fractions, but remember, fractions are just numbers. You treat them the same way as you treat a whole number. So the numbers we're distributing, or the pieces, the terms we're distributing here, 1/3 x and a +2. So 1/3 x and a +2 are the two things we will distribute. All right, 1/3 x times 3x. 1/3 times 3 is the same as saying 1 times 3 divided by 3. So 1 times 3 divided by 3. 1 times 3 is 3, divided by 3 is 1. There's an x here and an x here, so we have x squared. Now, 1/3 times -5. 1 times -5, -5 divided by 3. This is an x, and this one has a y, so I need x, y. All right, the next one, 2. Oh, I just did that. All right, 2 times 1/4 x squared. Well, 2 times 1/4 is the same idea. 2 times 1 is 2, divided by 4. So when I have 2 times 1/4, it's 2 times 1 divided by 4. So think of fractions just as division. If you have 2 divided by 4, that's going to leave you with a 1/2. All right? Keep the x squared. Now I have 2 times -3 minus 6. Okay? All right, the next one. Again, we have two sets of parentheses, so they're going to be two different things that multiply. All right? The first one, all we have in front is a negative symbol. And the second one, we have a minus x. Remember, if there's no value, you can put a 1. So I have -1 times 1x squared. -1x squared. -1 times -3x. -1 times -3 is +3. Negative times negative, positive. Keep the x. -1 times 2. Negative times positive is -2. All right, so we just distributed -1. Now we're going to distribute this -x. But remember, if there's no number, you can put a 1. So -1x. All right? -1x times 1x. Negative times positive is -1x, and x squared. -1x times -4. Negative times negative is +4. Carry the x. All right? So that's the first half of this notes. That's your lesson for today. And then tomorrow, or the next time you're in class, we're going to come back and we're going to do this combining like terms and final answer part. Okay?